Hi, my name's Ian Barnard. I'm a hand lettering artist from the UK, and in this video I'm going to show you how to do some freestyle lettering, combining multiple styles in one piece, followed by a bit of simple illustration to sort of tie it all together. This is using a new pack of brushes called Freestyler, which is available on the Affinity store now. But let's get started, and hopefully you can learn some tips and tricks of how to use Affinity Designer for iPad. So this is a rough sketch that we're going to be following today. I'm not going to be tracing it, just going to use it as reference. It's just a photograph of this drawing from my sketchbook. So the first thing we are going to do, I'm just going to lower the opacity of that drawing and turn it off a minute while we set a background colour. So I've chosen a sort of light grey colour, and then I choose the flood fill tool and then just tap on my canvas to fill that layer. Then we are going to create a new pixel layer. All this is going to be done in the pixel persona, so just using the tools available in that persona. Most of this tutorial will be based around the Freestyler Brush Pack, but one other tool I'm going to be using is something called Letterbuilder. So I'm going to select the paintbrush tool, and under my brushes I'm going to go through until I get to Letterbuilder. This just helps you to construct the letters of sans serif style quickly and easily. So I'm going to use the bold one, and I'm just going to select a colour that we're not going to be using today. We're going to be using a range of oranges and greys and blacks. So just going to choose like a purpley colour just for this grid. So I'm going to tap on there and then just resize it a bit. So with our sketch, we had try a slight angle, but what I'm going to do first is draw the letters flat and then rotate them. So create another layer, and then I'm going to select black, and then from the Freestyler brushes I'm going to select the Roughneck mono brush. This has got a sort of a rough edge to it. So we're going to draw the outline of the letter T, just following the guides. Then turn the guides off, and then we're going to get the Roughneck taper brush because we're going to add some little details. We want to sort of erode this because it's trying. We're not going to be perfect. I'm just rounding off the corners a bit. Just a bit broken. Now with the move tool, we are going to rotate our letter so it's at an angle slightly, and then we're going to make a duplicate of this letter by clicking on the three dots at the top and clicking duplicate. That will make another layer with that letter on in exactly the same position. We're going to select the bottom version of it and reduce the opacity to about 30%. And then what we're going to do with the move tool again is just move it down and to the left. And this is going to be our guide for creating a 3D letter. So go back to our layers, we click on the top layer, and going back to our Roughneck mono, we are going to then just join up the edges of our letter, like so, all the way around. And then grabbing our taper version, we're just going to go around, just going to neaten up that by erasing it. Just smooth off some of the harder edges. Add some more rough details. We can turn off that or remove that bottom layer, and we can also maybe erase a bit of the corner. Sort of fallen off. Now once we've done that, what we want to do is create a new layer below that. This is where we're going to put our colour of this object. So I'm going to select, I've got like 4 different shades of orange. I'm going to select the second lightest shade, and keeping on the Roughneck taper, I'm just going to draw an outline around the centre, around the outside of the letter, and then with the flood fill tool I'm just going to, actually with the tolerance I'm going to put right up to about 90% and then tap on the middle letter to fill that. Then I'm going to select a slightly darker shade, and that is going to be the sides of this letter. And then the final darker shade is going to be the bottom of the letter. With that done, we are then going to create a new layer, and we're going to clip this to that colour layer, because on that we're going to add some highlights and some shadows. So with the not the darkest, but the one up shade of orange we've got there, we are going to go, so our light source is coming from the top right, so the left and the bottom is going to be where we're going to add our shadow to this letter. And then we're going to add some highlights with this sort of yellow colour across the top and the right of it, because that's where the light will be hitting. And once we've done that, we're going to add a shadow underneath. So what we're going to do is swipe to the right to select the 2 layers, and then we're going to group them, and then we're going to make a duplicate of those by clicking duplicate under the 3-dot menu. And on the bottom layer we're going to click this icon here with the squares on it, and we are going to click Rasterize, and what that'll do is just merge it into one layer. And then we're just going to go to our effects menu and click on color overlay, and then we're going to make it black. So we can just reduce all the sliders until we get black. And then we're going to reduce the opacity. We're going to change it to multiply and reduce the opacity to about somewhere between 15 and 20. So 17 is fine. And then with the move tool, we are going to drop our shadow down and to the left a bit. And that's our first letter done. And now we're going to repeat that process of drawing the outline, moving it and colouring it, and then creating the shadow. So we're going to get up our Letterbuilder grid again. Just zoom out. We're going to move that grid across, and then we're going to create the R. So going back to the Roughneck mono brush, selecting black, and then we're going to create a new pixel layer. So again, we're just going to draw the outline of our letter, just following the guides. I'm just making it a little bit shorter for this one. With that done, we can turn off the grid again. We're going to keep this one at the angle it is, but we're going to add some detail using the Roughneck taper. Once we've done the detail, we are going to duplicate this layer by clicking on the three dots and clicking duplicate. And then with the bottom one, we'll reduce the opacity again, act as a guide. And with the move tool, we're going to bring that down. And then with the top layer selected, we are going to draw in the 3D element with the Roughneck mono. Just following lines. Anything that's outside of the letter. And then we can delete our guide. Create a new layer below it, grabbing that shade of orange again. And the Roughneck taper, we are then going to fill this area. Grab the flood fill tool and tap. And then a darker shade for the sides. And the final shade for the bottom of the letter. And then we are going to add that next layer and clip it by holding down on it and then dragging it over the colour layer, and you'll see the bar will be crossing the letter, and once you do that, it then clips it to that part so that any of the highlights that we get outside the letter won't show. So we can do again the top right and the sides of our letter. And then again, getting that darker shade and doing the left and the bottom. There we go, and that's our second letter done. I'll quicken up the process for the last piece, but it's just the same as those two, of drawing the outline, adding some detail, duplicating that layer, lowering the opacity to act as a reference, redrawing on that top layer, and then you go colour it in. But the last thing we need to do on this letter is to select by right sliding on the letters and then pressing the group button, and then we're going to duplicate that, and with the bottom one selected, click and select Rasterize, And then we're going to select color overlay, make it black, reduce the opacity at 17%, grab the move tool, and we're going to drop that down and to the right a bit. And that's our second letter done. And we're just going to slide to right and group the shadow with the main letter in case we want to move it in a minute. Same with the other letter T. And then we can bring up our Letterbuilder grid again. Move it over and we can do our letter Y. So there's our first word. We can now move on to the word fail. So if we bring back up our sketch, we can see that fail is in a script, but what brush we're going to use for this is one called Slipstream 3D. And when we draw with that, it creates a 3D element on part of the monoline brush. The inside bit is transparent, so if you go over the top, you'll see that you can see through it. To avoid that, say if you're doing like a T with a crossbar, then just keeping your pen held down on the screen means that you'll get this solid letter. And also what we want to do, make our letters, make our letter, or the curves of our letter smoother. We are going to click on this arrow when we're in the paintbrush tool to the right, and we'll see that stabilizer is set to no stabilizer. We're going to click to the right to rope stabilizer, and about 10 I think for this. Depending on how good you are at drawing letters or drawing curves, you'll have to push this up or lower. And then what we're going to do is in one motion we're going to do the F and come back up for the crossbar, and then in one motion we're going to do the A, I and L. And then finally the dot of the I. And now we're going to colour that letter, and how we're going to do that, it's slightly different from how we did the top letter. We are going to create a new layer below that, and once we've done that, we are going to then get the flood selection tool. We're going to click on the first letter, and then down here in our options we are going to, under mode, we're going to click on add. So when we tap the next part of our letters, it adds that to the selection. Same with the dot of the I. And once we have that, we are then going to click on refine. But we don't want to refine it in this way. We want to click on that square there, and we want to click on grow shrink selection. Because what we want to do is just increase it by a little bit, just as when we fill it, we don't have any thin white line between the black and the colour. So we're just going to increase the radius by about, I don't know, 5 pixels, press OK, and then we want to apply that, otherwise it would just go back to the normal selection. So with that applied, we can go to our underneath layer there, and then we're going to select the orange that we used as the main colour for above, and then the fill tool, and then we're going to just tap on that selection, and it's going to fill all of that. And to turn off that selection, we're going to press the X down here, and that's done. So if we go over here and then turn off the black layer, we can see we just got our fill layer there. And we're going to make this into sort of a gradient. So what we're going to do is a new layer, which we're going to clip to that layer. So we're going to hold down on it, drag it halfway over the color layer and let go, and that's now clipped to it. So we're going to select slightly darker color, and the brush we're going to choose is one called Spray Can. And then we're just going to go over the sort of bottom up to the middle, gently letting off the pressure. And then we're going to add a darker color just to sort of the bottom third section. And again, come off a bit lighter as we go up, just to give it that sort of gradient effect. And then the last thing we're going to do on that is we're going to add another layer, which automatically is clipped to there because we were on the clipped layer below. And then with the Sloppy Joe mono, and just with the white, we are going to put some highlights on the top right. Just see the size first. Oh, and also we want to, for this sort of thing, we want to take the rope stabilizer off. Bit big, reduce it down. A little bit smaller. We're just going to do it on the top parts of the letter. There we go, and we're just going to change the opacity to overlay, and then just reduce it slightly. And then the last thing we're going to do with that word is create a shadow like we've done with the top one. And again, we do this in a similar way. So we group the black layer and the color layer together. And then we want to make a duplicate of that. And then rasterize the bottom of those two versions. And then we're going to go to color overlay, making that black. And then we're going to reduce the opacity, turning it to multiply, 17 again. And then we're going to grab the move tool and move it down and to the left. And there's our second word done. We're just going to put those two together in a group, swipe to the right, and then move it below the word try. So if we bring up our sketch again, we can see that learn is in the sans serif style. And for the main L, we've got some learner plates. In the UK, you have, when you're learning to drive, you have a L plate slapped on the front and the back of it to warn people that you're coming. So I'm going to do that for that word. So we create a new layer, grab Letterbuilder and then a colour that we haven't got in our document. And then we're going to create one here. And then we're going to go duplicate, grab the move tool, move that over, do duplicate again. And then we can, once we do duplicate again, we can use the power duplicate where it just puts it into the same position. You've just moved it. And again, so we need 5, so that's great. We're just going to put all those together by selecting them all and then merge selected. So now just be on one layer. Create a new layer above that for drawing on. Go back to our Freestyler palette and select black. And the brush we're going to use once we go back to our Freestyler ones is one called Rock and Roller. This is one of my favourite from the pack. This makes it really quick and easy to draw sans serif letters. Just going to check the size. I'm going to do the L in the black, even though I'm going to change the colour of it to make it a bit bigger. Undo. So we're going to roughly draw out the word learn. We can go over and neaten it up in a minute. With that drawn out, we're going to select a brush called Broken Arrow, which we're going to then go round. We're going to make that brush also the eraser. We're going to go around and just take off these end bits, just neaten it up a little bit. With those done, we can now turn off the guide layer, the Letterbuilder guide layer, and we are just going to separate each of the letters onto their own layer. So just using the freehand selection tool, I'm going to draw around the letter, cut, deselect, paste, go back to that layer, select it, cut, paste, select around the A, cut, paste, and lastly select the E, cut, paste. Now what we're going to do for these 4 letters here, because we're going to work on the L on its own, we're just going to arrange these, just angle them slightly in different ways. Give this word a bit of personality. just alternative baseline, sort of going up, down, up, down. And we're just going to group those 4 letters together. So I can move them over a little bit, give the L a bit more room, bring that over. What I'm going to do is I want that to be orange. So I'm just going to grab the flood fill tool, select the orange, tap on it. And then I'm going to create a layer below that. Grab the white and then just make a square for it to go on. I'm going to use the Roughneck mono for this. Fill it with the flood fill tool. I'm going to erase a couple of holes so I can put some string through it. Let's create a new layer above there. Grab a dark grey. Going to make the L slightly bigger inside the white, and also what we're going to do is create a new layer which we're going to clip to that colour layer and just add some highlights and shadows to. Get the Roughneck taper again. And also with this white layer, we're going to clip a layer so we can add a little bit of shading to the bottom left hand corner. We're going to use Pinboard, which is a half-tone pattern, and a very light grey. Just reduce the opacity of that a little bit, just so it's very subtle. And then we're going to select all those layers together of the L on the other lines. We're going to group that. Going to make a duplicate like we've been doing. Rasterize the bottom version. Color overlay to black. And reduce that opacity, making it multiply. Selecting both of them, using the move tool, we're just going to rotate that, bring it over a bit. Going to group all those together so we can move it above the other letters. And then we can grab that shadow layer and bring it down and to the left. We're going to move try and fail above the learn group. And the last thing we're going to add to the learn part, add a layer, and we're going to just reduce the size slightly, because we're going to put a flourish off the letter R, like I mocked up in the little sketch. So I'm going to grab the rock and roller brush again and the black on my next layer, and then I'm just going to, also with the rope stabilizer to make it smoother, going to go down and around. Might try that again. That looks good. If we can just move the end up a little slightly. And the last thing I'm going to add to that group is we're going to grab a brush called Breadcrumbs, and we're going to make a pattern. I'm going to grab a sort of darkish grey, and go over the letters just to add this inline effect to the letters. This brush just saves the time of having to do loads of dots. And there's our last word done. Now to tie it all together, we're going to add some illustrative elements into the piece. So when I think of trying something, it's normally like watching a YouTube video or reading a book and putting that into practice. So we're going to do like the YouTube play button over here. So I'm going to grab the Roughneck taper and the dark grey. Because we don't want these to compete with the letters, these are going to be, the outlines are going to be a slightly lighter than the black. And do the play button in white. And then like we did with the letters, I'm going to create a layer below that for the colour. So drawing roughly around the outside. And then using the paint bucket, the flood fill tool to fill it. And then again, like normal, we're going to add another layer, drag it over the top of the colour layer so it clips it. Add the highlight layer. That's all right. And then add the shadow layer to the left and bottom. And again, we're going to give it a shadow as well, so group those two layers together, duplicate, rasterize, and color overlay. multiply, reduce it down, and just move it down to the left. So there's our first illustration. Let's move that up a bit out of the way so we can put in a book. And something else I relate to with trying, it might be some sports like basketball or archery, because you're trying to hit a target but you might fail. So go over this side, I'm going to draw the target here. Fit it, and then what I'm going to do is duplicate it. I'm going to fill it with a lighter grey, bring down the size a bit, duplicate it again, change the colour to an even lighter grey, and then just add a smaller part of the target in that darker grey again. Rasterize, merge all those selected. Then I'm going to add a mask layer because I just want to erase some bits in this board like it's old. And also I'm going to add a clipping mask to it where I'm going to add some shadows to one side. There's our target. Going to move that over and under the lettering. And maybe finish that off with an arrow hitting it. Okay, I'm going to draw my basketball. And the last thing I'm going to add on is maybe a mortarboard hat, a thing that students use when they graduate. And actually, before I put that in, I am going to do some clouds to put it on, just to make it stand out a bit more. So if I grab the Slipstream outline brush, what's great about this is it's a really good brush for making clouds. So a bit like the Slipstream 3D one, which we used for the word fail. This one, if you keep holding it down, when you release it, it creates this outline version like it did there, which we can then select the inside, refine, and just make it 5 pixels bigger. And create a new layer below it. Fill it with white. Back to the grey and back to the Roughneck taper. So there's all our illustrations done. And then the last thing we're going to do is just add some dots to fill in the spaces and some dotted lines. So creating a new layer at the bottom of our work, we are going to zoom out a bit so we've got a bit of space. I'm going to grab one called Flight Path, sort of light grey. And what we're going to do is do one there and one over this other side. Let's try that again. And then create another new layer. And we're going to grab the one called Milky Way. Because what this does random sets of dots. We can put around everywhere, maybe make some a bit smaller and maybe a different colour. And lastly, do some white ones. And then grab Superstar, which just creates some star shapes. In different sizes as you tap around the place. And the very last thing we're going to do is add a paper texture, subtle paper texture over the whole thing. Hopefully you'll be able to see this on the screen. So we're going to create two new layers. And on the first one, we're going to grab some other brushes from this pack, which are loaded paper texture brushes. We're going to select paperboard 1 and we're going to select white from our color palette. And all we're going to do is go over the whole thing. Make sure we cover the whole piece. If I zoom in, you'll be able to see that texture in the black areas and the colour as well. And what we're going to do is go to our layers and change transparency. We're going to turn that to screen and then reduce it down to about 50%. And then we're going to go to our other layer we created, select black, select paperboard 2, and again what we're going to do, zoom out and paint over the whole of the piece. And then we're going to go to our layers, transparency, you're going to change that to multiply and reduce it down to about 30%. And there we go, that's our finished piece. I hope you found that useful. If you've got any questions about my process, then please do leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of Affinity's creative sessions, and I'll see you in another video.